Hello class, I hope you're doing well. This week I wanted to continue on our discussion of adaptation. Last week I had you read Seymour Chapman's What Novels Can Do That Films Can't and Vice Versa. When boiled down, this article basically rests on the notion that when a story moves from one medium to another, there will necessarily be changes. And this is based on the fact that two different mediums will have different abilities to tell stories. A film cannot tell the story the same way a novel can, just in the same way as a radio show couldn't tell the story the same way as either of the aforementioned two, etc. Because one of the primary foci of this course is to examine stories in different mediums, across time, etc., with some adaptations being more literal and others less so, it is important that you are exposed to and understand theoretical approaches that scholars from the past have put forth about the process of adaptation. And that's because basically these theoretical frameworks are going to help you both to understand, make sense of, and even in some instances to interpret these adaptations that we are looking at over the course of this class. Basically, what I mean here is this. Part of the process of understanding adaptations and retellings will necessitate an understanding of what theoretical approaches and what scholars and other people have said in the past about that process, okay? So here's important to note that some of the earliest film scholars spoke of adaptation in terms of fidelity. Fidelity is rooted in an idea of faithfulness or being true or staying true to someone or something. Scholars who talked in terms of adaptation being rooted in fidelity believed there was something fundamental about a literary text, such as a book, a play, or short story, perhaps. Basically that there was an essence or an important core spirit to which an adaptation should abide or to which it should sort of stay true. Thus, those who held that view, this fidelity view of adaptation, would typically judge an adapted work based primarily on how well or to what degree that adaptation captures some perceived spirit or core feature of the text from which that adaptation was derived. This examination of adaptations pushes one toward a judgment of adaptation that is based primarily on a previously shaped understanding of a story that is rooted in the idea that the novel, play, etc., whichever work came first, is in essence the definitive version of that story. So basically, originalist. The original is the best, and therefore everything that is made subsequent to that should be judged based upon how well it adheres to the original. Now, there are a variety of critics who are critical of this approach to adaptation. So basically they don't abide by or don't think fidelity is the best measure. And a couple common reasons for this are as follows. First, it favors the original text. And there are some components of this that can elicit either elitist or classist sort of ideas. The reason for this is that often adaptation goes from a book to some other more mass media production, typically. That's not to say that there never has been a novelization, for example, of a film. It has happened, but much more commonly, it's the other way around, right? We make an adaptation of a book into a, so we go from a book into a film, basically. And so in reality, to be able to have access to books, one, you have to be literate, which means you have to have a certain level of education to partake and to understand them. And B, there is also usually a cost to this. So back in the day, and even now, books can be incredibly expensive. Yes, there are libraries, but they don't exactly have the same book en masse, right? If it's a really popular book, sometimes you can even sign up at your library for a book and you might not get it for months, even now, right? So there's an accessibility issue here. And so these other mass media can usually push out the same story to lots more people and at a better price and without the limitations of literacy, for example. Not to say that there aren't other barriers to a certain degree, but they're usually much less. Now, secondly, when we start to ask questions about what the spirit of a certain book or work might be, this particular question might elicit different answers based on who you're asking. If you and I and 5 other people, so 7 people total, read a book, we could ask each of them, what do you think was the meaning of this book or the spirit of it? And we might get 7 different answers. It's incredibly subjective. Therefore, if the meaning or the spirit of a work can be so incredibly subjective, then we must ask, can there be just one specific essence that can be pulled from that text and then moved over or put into a film after that, right? So although fidelity studies has been largely debated and for a long time, most film scholars do not abide by fidelity studies ideas anymore. However, that being said, film scholars have attempted over the decades of studying film to try and move past fidelity as sort of a core principle of the study of adaptation. But there have still long been elements of this sort of fidelity ideology that have sort of continued to be present within film studies. They're kind of niche these days, but these sort of issues tend to still come up. And frankly, I don't think we're going to get rid of it anytime soon. But this is something that I want you all to sort of consider as we go through the works that we're looking at in this class. Is there some sort of essence that can be taken out of some of these works? Personally, I am not of that school of thought, but there are sometimes compelling arguments that can be made. So, this is one thing that you can think about as we look at works that have been adapted in this class. As I said earlier in this video lecture, we are going to be watching some films and things or reading graphic novels or other things that have been adapted from earlier works that are going to be pretty close in terms of how they're presented, and others are going to be very flexible, let's put it, in the way that they retell these stories. And so this is just something to sort of think about as we move forward. Clearly, there are going to be a lot of different works that we're reading over the course of the semester, many of which go against or critique fidelity studies or move beyond fidelity studies. But this is an important component because especially early on, film scholars in particular were very set on this sort of fidelity theory. So it's important for you to know that just sort of as a foundational piece to this course. Okay, so just food for thought. So hopefully this sheds a little bit of light on one of the articles that I had you read for this week. And if you have any questions about it, feel free to message me on Office Teams, okay? And we'll chat about it there, or perhaps we'll chat about it to a certain degree within our online discussion forum. So I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Bye.